let's talk about raising your energetic standards. So raising your standards is a thing that people talk about a lot in dating, right? But we have standards in all areas of our life. This is something that I learned from my business coach, Connor Marriott, and also another mentor, Amanda Francis, is that you have energetic standards or set points or ranges of things of like what you'd tolerate in different areas of your life. Like there's a minimum and there's a maximum of what you will tolerate. And so we tend to live our lives within this range. This is what creates our reality. This is what creates our life. So we can have these energetic standards or set points or ranges in all areas of our life, like how we expect our partner to treat us and speak to us, how we'll tolerate our friends to speak to us and treat us, how we'll tolerate our boss or our manager to speak to us and treat us, like how much money we have in the bank, what kind of car we drive, what neighborhood we would live in, what kind of clothes we wear, where we go and spend our time, right? Like there's these standards for everything in our life. And when we're unaware or unconscious of these standards, these minimums and maximums in all of these areas of our life, they unconsciously rule our lives. They create our reality. And so we live our lives within these ranges, within this minimum and maximum that we've decided for that one particular area of our life. And so there's this beautiful, amazing quote by Carl Jung. It goes like this: until we make the unconscious conscious, it will rule our lives and we'll call it fate. Until we make the unconscious conscious, it will rule our lives and we will call it fate. So what that means is the things that we're unconscious of create our reality, and we think that that is fate, but it's not. It's just our minds. So the thing is that we will tend to surround ourselves with friends and people that have similar energetic set points than us, right? Like generally our friends have similar partnerships to us. Their partner treats them in similar ways to us. Our friends maybe have similar incomes than us, right? Like we often surround ourselves with people that live within similar ranges to us. They live in similar houses to us. They live in similar neighborhoods, etc. And so this becomes everything that we see in life. And so there's this belief or this perception that this is the only thing that exists, but this is not true. We can raise our standards. We can raise our energetic set points. We can raise our minimums and maximums for all areas of our life. So one example or a few examples from my personal life. In one of my previous relationships, I allowed myself to be spoken to really, really horribly, like basically verbal abuse. So my minimum for how I was okay with being treated in my relationship was like verbal abuse is okay. That was my minimum. Physical abuse was not okay. And that never happened to me because it was below what I would tolerate, right? And then when that relationship ended, I raised my energetic minimum to be better than verbal abuse. I would no longer ever tolerate verbal abuse in a relationship. I raised my minimum standard, right? And then I was in another relationship, and then in that relationship, I was never, ever, ever verbally abused, but I wasn't prioritized. And then when that relationship ended, I raised my energetic minimum again to be like, of course I'm fucking prioritized in my relationship. Like I will never tolerate not being prioritized in my relationship, and that's no longer my experience. Some more examples from my life. So these energetic set points, these minimums and maximums can also be in relation to how you will treat yourself, how you'll speak about and to yourself, right? How you speak to yourself in your own mind, how you speak about yourself with other people. So, for example, I used to speak to and about myself in really unkind ways. but I have since raised my energetic set point for myself, like raised my standards for myself, right? Like we can raise our standards for how other people treat us. We can raise our standards for our realities, like how much money we make, what kind of car we drive, etc. We can also raise our standards for ourselves. So I've raised my minimum standard of how I speak to and treat about myself so that I no longer speak to myself in unkind ways. Something else really funny that I noticed this morning is that I noticed that I am often late to lots of things in my life. I'm like 5 to 8 minutes late, like under 10 minutes late. And so in my mind, until recently, I had unconsciously, right? I'm thinking this is just what happens. This is fate. Unconsciously, I had decided that 5 to 8 minutes late is okay. Any later than that, 10, 15, 30 minutes late is not okay. That is below my minimum for what I consider okay with lateness. So I made the unconscious conscious today when I noticed that I was always that amount of late. And I'm like, okay, I'm raising my energetic standard for myself around how late I am. My minimum is now going to be on time. So that is a standard that I'm setting for myself, for my own being, right? And so our standards, our energetic standards, our minimums and maximums, they have been largely until watching this live unconscious, and they have unconsciously been ruling our lives and we've been calling it fate, right? Like, for example, in dating, maybe you have this belief or this saying that there's no good men out there or that you always attract the wrong men. That's because your energetic minimum standard around dating is at this particular place where you'll tolerate being treated to by a partner or in a dating scenario in a particular way. And then when you raise that standard and you make that conscious, that will no longer be your experience. But the thing is that at some point, like when you're raising your standards, when you're raising your minimum standards, this is when boundaries set in. So this is when, like, once you've raised your standards, they become set as your standards, and then it's no longer like a physical, tangible action that you have to take. It becomes unconscious again, but it's an unconscious raising of your standards. But in the moment that you decide, okay, I'm going to raise my standards around this particular area, you have to set a boundary. And that boundary is either set with yourself or with someone else, right? So what's an example I can give you? Say you have a friend that always borrows money off you. Let's just use that. Say you have a friend that always borrows money off you. So you, in this example, your current energetic standard around the way that friends treat you is that it's okay for your friends to constantly borrow money and not pay you back, right? So that's like unconscious. Now, listening to this live, you've made that conscious, you've become aware. Now you have a decision. Am I going to raise that energetic minimum? Okay, say that you've made the decision. I'm going to raise that energetic minimum. And now, to change the physical reality that's already created, you have to set a physical boundary. You have to create a new experience and a new reality. So that friend that always borrows money off you, you have to go up to them and say, hey, I am no longer okay with you borrowing money off me. I love you, but I will no longer be lending you money anymore. Period. Okay, so you've set a new boundary. You've enforced a boundary. You've stated a boundary. You've asserted a boundary. Then obviously you need to enforce it. So you have to live in alignment with that boundary that you've created. You have to act in accordance with that, not go back on your word. But then once you've set that, you only need to set it once, and then that becomes your new normal. That is now your new minimum. Does that make sense? So once you have consciously raised your minimum by setting a boundary and placing a boundary in place, then you no longer need to keep asserting that boundary or that minimum over and over and over again. It just becomes normal. It becomes your new set point. Excuse me. And so we can do this, excuse me, over and over and over again in every single area of our lives. And this is how we create a new reality for ourselves. this is how we start to live outside of the realms of what we previously viewed as possible for our experience. So whatever area of your life you want to shift and change, like whatever area of your life you're not currently happy with, like truly 100% happy with, that is an area of your life where you currently have an energetic minimum standard that is below what you actually want, right? So like, I invite you, after listening to this live, start to reflect on that. Like, are there any areas of my life that I'm unhappy in? Maybe it's your relationship. Maybe it's your friendships. Maybe it's your job or how much money you make or how your mum speaks to you, right? Whatever area of your life you're unhappy with, notice that your unconscious minimum standard in that area is below what you actually want. So then your work comes in raising, so now you've made it conscious, gone from unconscious to conscious. Now your work is in raising that energetic minimum in that particular area of your life. And like I said before, then now, once you've made that decision, you have to then assert that boundary. Create a boundary and assert the boundary. And that might involve having a conversation. So having a conversation with your partner or with your friend or with your mum or with your boss or with whoever it is, right? Or like me, like I made that funny example about being late. Like, did I say, yeah, I did say that, right? I've like written this all out and then I was like, no, I want to do a live about it. Yeah, I noticed that I was always late. And I was like, I'm not okay with that. I'm not okay with the fact that I'm always late. That's not good enough for me. I've decided that I'm going to raise that standard. And so that's a boundary that I'm now setting with myself. I don't need to communicate that to anybody else. That's just a new boundary that I'm setting for myself around I will no longer be late. I'm raising my minimum. And then, so this also goes for raising your maximum. So there's things that feel uncomfortable for us to receive or to experience. So the thing that inspired me to do this live in the first place was that I was eating at a fancy restaurant this afternoon. And I took a photo and I put it on my story. And I was sitting there and I was sitting at this fancy restaurant and like I wasn't there for any reason. I just decided to take myself out to lunch. And in the past, I would never have just done that. I wouldn't have been okay with going to a fancy restaurant and spending X amount of money just because by myself, right? But I've raised my maximum and now I'm like, of course I'm fucking worthy of taking myself out to lunch just because. And also in the past, I would have felt really, really uncomfortable about going to a fancy restaurant by myself. Like, what if people judge me? What are people gonna think? I'm sitting there by myself. It's fucking Melbourne Cup. I didn't even realize, and everybody's in there like high heels and blah, 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 and I'm wearing my Birks. But I've raised my maximum of what is okay for me to experience. Like, I can sit in a fucking fancy restaurant by myself in my Birks. I don't give a fuck because I've raised my maximum. I've raised my range of what I get to experience in my life, right? So like, it's not just about raising your minimum, it's also about raising your maximum, because your maximum is your ceiling. It's like your capacity to experience good things in your life, right? And this ties into worthiness. So it's like, in order to raise our maximum, we have to raise our level of worth. The same goes for your minimum, really. In order to raise your minimum, you also have to raise your level of worth, of self-worth. What else do I want to say? Yeah, so I just really invite you to reflect, like, what areas of your life are you feeling called to and inspired to increase your standards, to raise your standards? Maybe you want to raise your energetic minimum, or maybe you want to raise your energetic maximum. What areas of your life are you not currently happy with? What areas of your life are your standards below what you actually truly really want and desire in your heart? And the thing is that we can constantly raise our standards, even when we're in a relationship. You don't have to settle for what you're currently experiencing in that relationship. You can raise your standard of what you want in that same relationship. And then that involves having a conversation with your partner and letting them know, like, in a really beautiful way, not in an accusing way, but in a really beautiful way that, like, my needs are this now. I need more. I want more. I desire more. And can you meet that? Can you meet me in that? So, like, we can constantly be raising our standards all the time, and you can create new standards for yourself even within the same relationship dynamic, right? Like, your relationship with your mum might have been the same for X number of years. That doesn't mean that it has to be like that for the rest of your life. You can raise your standards of what that relationship is like for you now. Same goes for the way that you're treated in your partnership. Maybe you want your partner to say, "Good morning, beautiful," every morning, and you've been together for 40 years. That's fucking okay. You can raise your energetic standard in that relationship, even though your relationship has been like this for 40 years. You can decide what it's like for the next 40 years. You don't have to settle in any fucking area of your life. Just because your experience is X now doesn't mean that you have to have that X experience forever. You can change it. You can constantly change it. You can constantly raise your standards for every single area of your life because you are worthy. You are so fucking worthy. I'm done. I love you. You're worthy. Go raise your standards. Mwah.